We have with us right-wing psychologist Chris Ferguson today.
Yes. So you can see that it's performative, but it's not nice. It's not actually empathic or caring about other individuals. It's all about the people themselves showing how moral they themselves are. We want good bridges. We need to get the best people who can build bridges in a position of building those damn bridges. If you believe that Harvard University or Nike or the APA is a truly caring organization, then you're just dead ass wrong.
Hello and welcome to CultureScape, the show that interviews the geek creators and influencers that built nerd culture. I'm your host, Peter Pischke, and today we have a very special guest. He's not only a rock star in the Pink Floyd tribute band Gods of Avalon, but also a psychologist and columnist for Psychology Today. And we are going to be talking about the culture of fear. Yes, CultureScape, we talk about culture, usually nerd culture, geek culture, tabletop and comics, anime and video games. But today we're going to make it a little bit different. We're going to talk about the other side of the nerds, and that is the science nerds. And what we have been seeing in the universities and institutions that's put a lot of people on edge. With this terrible massacre on October 7th, it is worth discussing what is happening in the universities. And to give my audience a sense of bearing, I'm bringing with me one of the most well-spoken, thoughtful guys that are in academia that talk about academia around. And Chris Ferguson is definitely one of those. And I know many of you have been feeling it. It seems like every institution is becoming more political and ugly in increasing ways, whether it's Harvard and Yale pushing anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, the AMA pushing all kinds of nonsense, the teachers' unions and many school districts now putting out statements against reading and math standards. It feels like the world is on fire and it makes no sense. So today we're going to go into why is this happening? What are the dynamics at play? What needs to happen for things to change? And what does Chris think about Ghostbusters? Yes, that is one of my favorite film franchises, as many of you know. I want to know what he thinks. All right, Chris, let's get started.
Yeah. Well, I think, the good news, I don't think everybody's lost their mind. It's just the people that get the most attention are the people that lost their mind, unfortunately. And what I think was happening, at a lot of academic institutions, whether that's universities or places like the AMA or the American Psychological Association or places like that, is that they've increasingly become run more by what you might think of as like technocrats, just kind of people bureaucrats, that just want to kind of keep their job, and their constituents or their loudest constituents end up being these highly progressive, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but these kind of like really far left, very vocal individuals who really sort of buy into these kind of grievance politics. And they've used a very effective line of argumentation that you need to do this thing or you're racist or you're transphobic or you're sexist or whatever it may be. And all these things are taboos in American society, right? To be racist is a taboo, to be sexist is a taboo. We're not supposed to be these things. So they've really managed to sort of leverage these types of arguments and get these institutions to do very stupid things, in some respects. So, I mean, I can tell you, like, everybody thinks about like the highly woke, a young Gen Z, sort of like the stereotype of Gen Z folks. And yeah, obviously the people that are running the AMA are not that. I mean, they're not. They're in their 60s. They're Gen Xers for the most part, maybe even some boomers still. But they're cowards is what they are. So essentially that they're responding to the loudest voices in their constituency and doing so badly, both because there's not a counter voice, there's not another side, or there hasn't been another side that sort of argued against that very effectively. And they're afraid of losing their jobs, essentially. They're sort of getting into these types of moral narratives because they, which I understand, they have a family to feed and all this kind of stuff. So we see this in some situations where I think it was Peter Bonilla, is that the teacher who even like recorded his principal, that the principal on the recording even said, like, I don't really believe this, but I have to do it, because it's what the kids want or whatever the teachers want, or, that kind of thing. So I think on the political left, there's just been this like incredible moral aggression, if you will, that has forced a lot of, people into these positions that look really, really bad to the vast majority, because the vast majority don't really have a constituency in these institutions, essentially. So I think that's what happened with the universities. But what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years is these universities have made statement after statement on Black Lives Matters, on Ukraine, on Roe v. Wade or Dobbs, or and then all of a sudden 1,400 Jews are massacred, and they can't find their voice. All of a sudden, institutional neutrality, they discover this, and it's just a terrible look, right? All of a sudden, the one thing you can't, condemn is something we've all been taught is terrible, which is the massacre of Jews, right? So it's a really terrible look, and they're doing it again because they're afraid of this very far left political, group, which maybe is 8% of students, it's not, or maybe a little higher. It's not the majority of students, but they're the most vocal students who will go on Twitter and create a Twitter mob, or will, end up protesting on the news or something like that. So they're really trying, they found themselves, all these institutions, essentially, extorted by, or pressured by this relatively small number of highly vocal activists, and they haven't figured out a strategy of how to deal with them other than to capitulate.
You bring up a good point that this is seen more in the technical sides of society. So no one is saying, I want to go work the trucking job, and then you have to sign the colonial statement. Oh, our trucking depot was built on Cherokee land. You don't have to do that to be a trucker. If you're going to plumbing school, no one asking, okay, keep giving me your pronouns, Joe, before we're going to teach you how to use the wrench. That's not happening. It's happening in the technocracy. So it's really bizarre, though, from my standpoint, because I talk to a lot of people who either teach a medical school or have attended medical school. And that's when I first really noticed it, because it wasn't just like the humanities. It wasn't just like the sideshow that, the university, at least all my life, most of the 20th century has been very left-wing. It was something really that went beyond that, where I'm talking to people who teach in medical schools and are like, look, if you want to be here, you have to sign on to all these things, and you have to shut up, and you have to even push down dissent. I've talked to students who say, what seems to matter at this point, I still have to do all the hard work, study, do the homework, but the emphasis, if you want to get ahead, if you want to get accolades, is you have to play all the right political cards. You have to be against colonialism. You have to be against racism. You have to be against, you name it, they're doing it. And it seems like the people the people who matter. So it doesn't really matter if Joe the plumber, if he's like, before I work on your clogged sink, I need to tell you about your privilege. That would be annoying, but it doesn't hurt anything. The problem is if you're going to medical school and the people who are graduating, and this is the thing that I hear all the time, people tell me, but they're not allowed to say out loud. Like, no, don't say this. Don't write this down. Don't put this anywhere.
Yeah.
But this is how I think, is that there's a fear that we're pushing these things to the point where it is affecting and will have a future impact on the quality of people from these institutions. So the medical school student who graduates today, and they got ahead of the other student because they knew how to write the best essay about the history of white privilege, that's not the person you want necessarily doing surgery on you. But the system is set up in such a way, and what's happening right now is that is what's pulling people ahead, and there is this worry at the moment that we're going to see further degradation of institutions and further real-world consequences in a way I don't think we've seen so far.
Right. Yeah. Listen, who do you want to build your bridge, right? The person that got the highest SAT score, or the person who was able to talk about like how they overcame adversity, kind of thing. I want my bridge. I don't care if the person who built it's black, white, Asian, as long as they're smart, right? And they know how to build a bridge. That's what we should be, looking at. But what's happening, at universities and also, medical schools, and you hear all this talk about dropping standardized exams, right? So a lot of universities have dropped the SATs or the ACTs. A lot of grad schools are dropping the GREs. I don't know if medical schools have, any have dropped the MCAT yet, but I think that person talked about, that possibility. and they do so because, there are these group differences, right? That typically, I mean, anybody can, if I gave you different ethnic groups, anybody could probably figure out where they sort, so you talk about Jewish Americans, Black Americans, Asian Americans, American Indians, Latinos, and whites, kind of these 6 broad groups. Just Asians score highest, Jews score second, whites are right in the middle, Latinos right behind whites, and then, Native Americans and Black Americans tend to score the lowest. So people look at those scores and, rather than saying, well, maybe it's because, the groups on the bottom tend to have more poverty, we should address that in order to try to fix things. They just don't like the test, right? So we're just going to get rid of it. We're just going to scrap the test and have people write essays or look at other things. But unfortunately, the tests work very well, right? The tests actually do, predict, academic achievement, performance in, high intellectual careers like engineering or medicine or things like that. Whereas being able to write an essay, first off, a lot of these people aren't going to actually write the essay. They're going to hire somebody else to write it for them. And essay writing, if anything, if talk about unfair, the opportunity to train people how to, or get coaches and this kind of stuff is more inequitable than the SATs or the GREs. Sometimes there are fair, comments about, well, maybe rich people can hire tutors for the GRE or the SAT or things like that. That's fair, as a criticism, but that's certainly also true for the, essays. And again, whether you can write, because the pressure is now going to be the sense of finding some element of your, I'm Irish American, so I'm going to write about my grandparents, in the Depression, with Irish need not apply signs and how somehow that related to my life, which is going to be an incredible stretch, to be honest with you, but that's what people are going to feel pressured to do now, is to come up with that narrative over and over and over and over again in order to sort of win at this kind of adversity Olympics, kind of thing. And there's really no evidence whatsoever that your ability to do this, or to hire somebody to do it for you, is in any way predictive of your ability to build a bridge or to take out, a tumor from a sick person or whatever else that we're interested in these people doing. So, it is an unfortunate turn away from meritocracy, which we could say the U.S. and other sides are not perfectly, meritocratic, but the other alternative is definitely garbage. So we're going to end up with much worse outcomes rather than fixing the margins of a meritocracy. So I think those concerns are legitimate, that you're going to start selecting people for advanced careers based upon the view that they've overcome, or their ability to write an essay claiming, in many cases probably falsely, that you have overcome adversity. You're going to get much worse outcomes from that pool of applicants than you are if you have some kind of standardized quantitative exam that is predictive of actual academic outcomes, which things like the SAT, the GRE, the MCAT, the LSAT all actually do. So it isn't a great turn. Again, but a lot of what's happening in these last few years is not really rational. It's all about this sort of performative morality, groups that are trying to, none of these companies that are talking about land acknowledgements, this building is built on land that used to belong to the Seminoles. They're not going to give it back. It's just,
It doesn't okay, and now you have to make a donation to the nearest reservation charity. No, that isn't usually part of that.
I don't think they do that. I think they just say this thing, and what they don't tell you is that, well, the Seminole took it from some other tribe before they did. Yep. Native Americans don't start their speeches with, "Hey, our reservation was, we had some land taken from us, but we also took land from this other tribe." The English don't start their talk saying this used to be Celtic land. Before we took it. It's very selective and very performative. And, even these companies like you're saying, whatever is Microsoft or Google or Apple or, Nike or things like that. And they say, well, Black Lives Matter, put the little square on their Instagram, this kind of stuff. But they're they're using slave labor in China to build the stuff that they build. Their actual treatment of human beings is atrocious. But this sort of stuff that they do by supporting whatever the latest progressive cause may be is all about, sort of performative, look at us, we're so good, we're little angels. but their actual behavior is atrocious, in terms of how they treat other people. And I think you can kind of see this and that's what came out last month, I think, that made this really, really clear, is you always talk about support minority groups, words or violence, watch out for microaggressions, and all of a sudden, 1,400 dead Jews, well, all of a sudden context matters, whatever the hell that means. So you can see that, this it's performative, but it's not nice. You know what I mean? It's not actually empathic or caring about other individuals. It's all about the people themselves showing how moral they themselves are.
It's a culture of selfishness and ignorance. I think one of the craziest things I'm seeing right now is the teachers' unions are joining the chorus of, we have to get rid of math testing. We have to get rid of anything that might put out an unequal outcome. So there's like, that could start at the math and science standard. But under that rubric, that could include anything in education. I mean, it's not all bad. Like, I'm starting to see people finally say, like, why is it when someone wants to enter an elite college, they have to look at, oh, you played lacrosse for 5 years. Oh, you went on a mission trip to the Uruguay. Like, why does any of that matter if I'm trying to go to school, to become a chemist? It really should. So it's not like this is all bad. Some of these ideas or these thinking, there are some positives to it. Like, if they're thinking, okay, what is getting in the way of these students getting ahead? Fine. But generally, it seems like the way that they are dealing with it is that they're just going to pull up the ladder behind them. They're going to pull up the rug. Oh, you have a problem with this rug? Whoop, rug gone, problem fixed.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it, I think, is, with like the standardized testing, like math testing or reading testing in schools, I suspect is this sense of like the numbers are embarrassing. That first off, the numbers across the board aren't great. But also, if you do see these kind of disparate outcomes that, certain, like the Asian kids do better than everybody else, and kids from like Black or Native American backgrounds don't do as well as the other kids do or whatever, that's embarrassing, right? Nobody's happy about that. So you just get rid of the test, and then poof, it all goes away, right? Then you don't have those embarrassing numbers, anymore. So if you get rid of those, and I think that's a lot of what like universities are doing by getting rid of the SATs, is now you don't have those sort of that sense of we're adjusting standards for minority kids versus like white or Asian kids, which is, was the root of the recent Supreme Court case, that struck down affirmative action, at universities, so. I think there's a certain like kill the messenger effect, but I agree with you. I mean, there were other like stupid ways of like bringing people into like, I like the legacy admissions. I mean, I'm all for this idea of like, just because your dad's rich and building, for a university, I don't think that his kids should get it. It's a nice thing to do. But but what they're doing is they're really just sort of selling spots at a university that rich people that can donate a lot of money can get their kids in kind of automatically. I'm all for getting rid of that. I think that is absolutely an unfair advantage. And maybe that does advantage whites more than other groups or whatever. I'm still fine with getting rid of that. The problem is not that the system is a perfect meritocracy and we shouldn't do anything. I think there are some legitimate criticisms of some of these things where it's not meritocratic, and we should fix that, like by getting rid of legacy admissions. Possibly, as you say, getting rid of some sports favoritism. Although that'll be difficult for the schools that make a ton of money off of it.
Mm-hmm. The big school around here is University of Nebraska, state over. Huskers are huge, like all the states surrounding it. And if they lost that kind of privilege, I think everyone in Omaha would just lose their minds.
Yeah, and it would be the same in Florida. I mean, like UF, FSU, even UCF right down the street from me are all kind of big, football schools and that kind of stuff. So they wouldn't be happy losing that opportunity. But you're right. I mean, there is a sense of like, well, what is a university for? And maybe there's some fair criticism that it's become more of like a credential, right? There's the sense of like to get any kind of like a mid-level drone position in society, you have to have this kind of stupid credential that it's not really required for the job. So maybe we're over sending people to universities anyway. But if we're going to send people, it should be the people that intellectually have the best ability to succeed in that institution, and that should be the end of it. Now, if that means we send a lot more Asian kids to universities, then we send a lot more Asian kids to universities because they're the ones that, whatever reason, have prepared, for universities. And if other groups, including whites, don't like that, then we need to think about, well, what do we need to do as parents, or as a culturally, in order to achieve at the same level, not shoot them down by saying that they don't have nice personalities, or they're not kind, or whatever the hell it was that Harvard did to them in order to prevent a lot of them from going. Again, if we want good bridges, we need to get the best people who can build bridges into the position of building those damn bridges, and whether they say that someone microaggressed against them in the past, something like that, isn't really going to tell us anything about whether they can build a bridge or not. But yeah.
No, I agree. And I think, this is a culture show, and I think the theme of this is a culture of fear and its knock-on effects and its direct effects. Knock-on effects is what's going to happen to the future. These institutions feed very important parts of society and politics, law, science, medicine, where you do need the technocrats, where you need the kind of person that has expertise, someone like you. And it's very important they actually know how to do their job. Getting ahead because you could say all the right things, and it's less about ability. And I know it's a hard conversation for some people to have or think about. That does cause future problems down the road. The other problem is when this happens, it seems like these institutions, they get apathetic about their moral responsibilities. In point, the AMA, there are so many things that the American Medical Association needs to work on. Say it's any of the stuff even that I cover. The opioid crisis, pain patients losing access, cancer patients losing access. Well, if the AMA is spending all this time talking about white heteronormativity, that's less time they're spending on dealing with the issue with cancer patients not getting enough pain control. And that's them, they're taking what they're supposed to do, and they're taking the opportunity cost, and they're flipping it over for I hate to use this word. I'm trying not to use this word very much, but woke, the woke thing to do. And that makes it's like, okay, you've done that, but now what about, Gail, who's third stage lung cancer in the hospital? She's dying, and her doctor says, well, I can't give you the pain meds because I don't want to get in trouble. That's your problem, AMA. Like, anyone can complain about racism. Literally everyone is. Someone else could do that. You got to do the cancer thing, but you can't have that conversation because all this is just all one giant blob of isms. And that worries me because I think, okay, I'm seeing it only from my perspective on this little thing. How many little things across the country is this happening to? Like, where else are there things that need to be covered that are not being covered because they're now worried about heteronormativity, colonialism, the white patriarchy. You name it, they're doing it, and it leaves me. And I don't think I'm alone in this. It leaves me kind of concerned.
Yeah. They made a statement on everything but the degree to which the exorbitant salaries doctors have contribute to high healthcare costs in the United States, right?
Yeah.
So
No, we don't like them. Quiet.
Well, it's a funny thing. You can even think of they don't have to be conservatives, right? They could even address real progressive causes, like say some kind of improving healthcare, whether it's universal healthcare or at least just bringing costs down for people. So white coats for Black lives, whatever, right? They're all having die-ins and this kind of thing. What they don't talk about is it's pretty damn expensive to get medical care if you're in a poor community, right? So what are you guys going to do about that? Well, crickets, nothing, because you have to figure out some way of bringing drug costs down, surgery costs down, all this stuff. We all know that Americans on average pay more for this stuff than even other industrialized democracies. Part of that, there's a lot of reasons for that. It's a complicated problem. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole, but part of it is doctor salaries. They make a lot more money here than they do in the UK. So, you can fix that because you're the doctors, right? You're the organization that represents doctors. So you could talk about that. We make too much money. We're so sorry. We would like to make less money so that, poor people can get more medicine and that sort of stuff. So you could tackle that. But no, it's going to be, like you said, the heteronormativity or whatever. That's the world's biggest problem at the moment. If you're a poor, struggling coal miner in West Virginia, that your big problem in life is colonization or something of that sort. No, it's really not a pressing problem for the median person. Even the median poor person is not worried about post-colonialism or land acknowledgements or whether orcs are evil in Dungeons and Dragons, or all these kind of silly things that we're seeing people take positions on at this point. They want more money, and they want to have access to healthcare and food. And they don't want leaking oil drums in the backyard and all this kind of stuff. If you really want to help these communities, those are the kind of things you want to address, not heteronormativity or the patriarchy or any of these other kind of like weird things that none of these organizations are really woke. That's the reality. They're all in it for their own empire, if you will, including academia. They're preserving their own piece of the pie, so a lot of it is like, look at what this hand's doing so you don't see what this other hand is doing down here. And that's that performative nature of a lot of these things. If you believe that Harvard University or Nike or the APA is a truly caring organization, then you're just dead ass wrong. The APA in Black Lives Matter, that whole, like in COVID, all that kind of stuff, all the stuff about social justice. At the same time, they laid off, I think, like a whole bunch of their low-ranking employees. They gave their executives raises at the same time. That's the opposite of social justice, right? I mean, that's rich people stuffing their own pockets. It's a classic example of an organization that talks the talk about social justice, but their actual behavior with their actual employees is the opposite of that thing. The people at the top are always going to come out ahead, and they're just going to say or do whatever they need to do in order to do that. Now, they could make a lot of noise about conservative values, or they can make a lot of noise about progressive values, but they're just basically human beings doing what human beings always do, which is to be selfish and to try to hoard as much stuff for yourself.
Have you seen it in your career? Because you've done plenty of scientific research. You've done like violence on video games. You did a ton of work on that. That's really interesting. Are you starting to see any of these effects in the world of science and trying to put together studies and covering certain topics? Because I know, at least from the medical field, anything that seems to be approaching the trans issue, a lot of it is getting stuffed down. It's like, no, quiet, don't talk about this. Are you seeing any of that? Because I do have concerns, because I feel like these institutions, especially science or medicine, where you do need these long form analysis, that's so important. And you see more and more of these things saying, hey, you're not allowed to say that, or you're not allowed to cover it. It does leave me worried. Do you see any of that, or is that just overblown, at least in your area?
No, absolutely. I mean, the example you mentioned is a perfect example of this, where you see a lot of like trans medicine and this kind of thing, right? And that's not an area I'm an expert in by any means, but you certainly do see this kind of really poor quality studies come out. They get hyped by the news media because they kind of fit the sort of narrative. I don't have a real strong opinion one way or the other on this issue, just to be very upfront with it. But you do definitely see the sense of the science is supposed to say something that supports this kind of like progressive narrative. And where I can tell you that where it is actually in my realm that I know very clearly is, if you think about like social media, right? People talk about social media having, maybe causing mental health problems for young people. And of course, gender dysphoria would be an example of a mental health problem, right? So you do see like hundreds of studies that sort of broadly look at social media effects on mental health. Though I'm not convinced that there's any real evidence. It's just social media does cause problems with mental health. I don't think the evidence is there, but you see all these, literally hundreds of studies that, look in some way at social media use and mental health. And the number of studies look at social media and gender dysphoria is exactly zero. Even though this gets brought up in books, it gets brought up in debates. Abigail Schreier has a pretty popular selling book about this idea that there's this like social contagion around, trans issues in girls. I'm not saying she's right. I'm not saying she's wrong. But she, raises this hypothesis that social media is part of that. I've heard other people bring that up as a possibility quite regularly. And the number of scholars who want to touch that topic is zero. Because they're afraid to. Because what if you find evidence that, I'm not saying, again, I'm sort of skeptical. I don't think you're going to find much. But what if you did? What if you provide as a probably progressive scholar evidence that social media increases people, say, trans identification, or even if it's just correlated, then it's not the correct finding, right? So I think what happens is people just don't do it because there's, they know they don't want to find any evidence of any kind of even a correlation there. So yeah, go ahead. You guys say something.
No, I agree, and you use the word cowardice, and that describes the issue so well. It's frustrating because it feels like I keep hitting my head against a wall because I see this problem over and over, whether it's the sciences or medicine or journalism, or anything that requires people to be responsible and to say no sometimes. They just don't want to do it. Someone at some point figured out the solution to dealing with hard things is you just don't deal with it. And and it goes away magically. No one's yelling at you anymore, and you don't have to disappoint people or do anything controversial whatsoever, and everyone loves you. So someone figure that out, and then everyone said, "Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the trouble is with a lot of these things, like these are interesting questions, right? I mean, as scientists, we're supposed to be curious. That people have raised this question. Does social media cause gender identity issues? I don't know that it does or doesn't, but it's an interesting question. And I think whatever answer you find is fascinating, right? If you find that there's no effect, and that kind of fits my priors, but that's interesting. Yeah, I'm right, right? But on the other hand, if you do find an effect, that's still fascinating. That's interesting, and screw my priors. I want to know what the truth is. It is a shame that like some of these questions have become, taboo. And I do some research on like race and policing, which, at least that field does have, a fair number of studies that look at things like, does race predict, police misconduct? Are there sentencing disparities in the U.S. based upon race and things like that? And I think, fortunately, I think the policing and race field is pretty good. Basically, there's not a whole hell of a lot of evidence to suggest that race is really predictive of police misconduct. There's some studies that go back and forth, to be fair. But, what you see with the sentencing field, which is interesting, because myself and a colleague are working on or I think we're pretty close to publishing a meta-analysis of these studies. And what you see is in the studies themselves, the authors are pretty honest and say, like, we don't really, maybe there's a tiny difference between, say, like Latinos and whites, but there's no difference between blacks and whites. And then another study will find the inverse. And it's all just kind of this messy bunch of really, nothing, essentially. For the most part, you don't really see a whole lot of powerful disparities, in sentencing in the U.S. criminal justice system, once you control for things like prior, arrests and whatever else. But then what you see is then these scholars end up in news media, and they're like, it's unfair, unjust, racist, Jim Crow 2.0.
Yeah, they invariably, doesn't matter what they are, do, or say, they invariably are like, we have with us right-wing psychologist Chris Ferguson today.
Yes. I haven't voted for a conservative for president ever. But yeah, but it is true. You get these kind of things like, I think probably at my university, I think somebody made the joke that, that I'm the conservative on the psychology department. I'm not it's simply because
I know.
Yeah, I know. I say, like, you should like listen to conservative students and not tell them that they're trash. I guess that's kind of like things that I've said. That sort of brands me as the conservative or whatever. I'm pretty vocal about, like, not supporting Black Lives Matter and things like that. The organization, of course, that is to say, that's because they bought mansions with the money they get donated to them, and they stuff their own pockets full of money, and their whole narrative about policing was wrong. So that's why, the attempt is to make some sort of like database argument. Unfortunately, so much of the universities, I mean, I think you still have like physics and chemistry, and most of those people still trying to do their stuff. I mean, I think probably most psychologists are still trying to do some kind of good research in psychology. But you did have this kind of like wave, over really like the last 60 years. I mean, it kind of went back into the 1960s, so particularly in the humanities of this sort of, I know some people call it like the grievance study, the sort of like, the gender studies, the various ethnic studies and this kind of stuff that, these were fields that really were never, I mean, they're on interesting topics, so I mean, it's not that the idea is bad, but the way that these fields sort of developed was to really push for an advocacy agenda, not the truth. And for many years, I think we all just kind of like ignored them and said, well, that's nice. Professor so-and-so is talking about white privilege and whatever, the kids deserve to hear different viewpoints anyway. They'll hear this viewpoint and probably most of them won't take it seriously. And it's not worth it for me to like argue with this person because then I'll look bad,
Yes.
And then they basically destroyed universities. I'll be upfront and say I was among the people, certainly 10 years ago, I was like, I'm just not going to get into debate about white privilege, which is, kind of a stupid concept, but because it's just not worth it. Now it is, because universities are like on fire, and a lot of it is because of these fields. Most students don't want to major in these things. So these departments, these fields have really outsized influence. In proportion with the research they put out that actually means anything, or the students that they teach as majors, in their classes as such. But the fact that they were able to leverage these kinds of moral arguments, I mean, we see it hit its apex now, where you have universities and students who can't condemn Hamas, a terrorist organization that murdered 1,400 Jews, and it's not to say you can't criticize the Israeli state. I think there are things that they do that are bad too, but I mean, come on, these are kids and elderly people who died. I mean, that's bad, and this, and you have like people that are educated who just can't say, well, you know what? I really feel for the Palestinian people. I'm scared that a lot of civilians are going to die in a bombing campaign, but Hamas is terrible. And those are not like mutually exclusive views that you can have, So it is amazing to see, universities really struggle to condemn Hamas, to condemn the murder of, 1,400 Israelis, and all these students, who are ripping down posters of which is completely anti-free speech. And it's fine to protest on campus if you want to, but they're, in some cases they're attacking Jewish students. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's been interesting. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I've seen so many people in the last month, most who are moderate left-wing liberals, some that are more hardcore progressives, but so many people I've seen, I'm sorry, the terminology is what it is, but wake up, and they're like, oh, wow. So they're not saying this part, but I wish they would say, oh, so like those terrible people on the other side of the aisle, the right-wingers, and they said, oh, well, you need to be careful who you promote and put these universities. When we talk about like Ilhan Omar, how she spouts anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Oh, that's just a Trump talking point. And now I'm seeing more people who are realizing, like, wait a second, these people at Harvard and Yale, they're chanting "to the river, to the sea." We have this. I wish I brought with me today this kind of almost moving video of this young woman who's screaming at the president of the college, and she's saying, "Why aren't you doing anything? These people say they want to kill people like me. Why aren't you doing anything?" He doesn't have a response, by the way. He doesn't really respond at all. And I've seen so many people wake up and they're realizing, oh, actually, yeah, that this is happening. This is a thing that's real, that's happening now. Now, obviously, all the disclaimers, most people who are Muslim obviously don't feel that way, especially in the West. Unfortunately, the kind of person that might seem to be a lot of the people that were promoted and brought into these institutions like Harvard and Yale. And so it makes me not happy. It gives me a little hope that people are waking up and they are noticing that these issues are here. But on the other side, it worries me that when we do have a few people who come out and are like, this is a big problem, we still get the heavy pushback on the other side. And so it makes me wonder if this is just them pushing out more people who might have a problem with it, or like something's actually going to change.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think for many of us, you hit on the head, like sort of moderate left or whatever. That's probably about where I am. Especially in my generation. I mean, I don't know if it's different for the kids today, but we were brought up with like a history of World War II and the Holocaust, and like killing Jews is bad, right? Mm-hmm. And that and all the stuff about. I mean, I know I'm being very simplistic about this, but it's not hard, And probably a lot of people have seen that picture of like a Nazi rally, and there's like everybody's got their hand raised, right? And there's the one guy who's sitting there, with his arms folded, and the narrative is like, everybody thinks they're going to be that one guy, right? They're going to be the guy who's going to resist hate, right? And now if you're that one guy or not, right? If you're chanting from the river to the sea, maybe there's like, and I understand maybe there's some complexities in the background of that phrase, in fairness, but we know this being used by Hamas now to reference, the annihilation of Jews in Palestine, right? This whole area. So it is being used to advocate for genocide. And I think what happened in the institutions is a lot of the dialogue, the narrative, use kind of like euphemisms like decolonialization, right? It's kind of this thing like. My friend Wilford Riley, who's a criminal justice professor in Kentucky, I think he put it best, like decolonization is basically ethnic cleansing but woke, essentially. Like, we kind of think about the implications of what everybody thinks it's like, oh, we're gonna like take a few like white people books out of the library and put some people in from like novels from Africa, which actually would be fine. There's nothing bad about that, but now we're seeing the sense of like, no, people have said, like, Lewis said, what did you think decolonization meant after 1,400 Jews got killed? This was before the bombing campaign, You know,
Yep.
you can criticize the Israeli bombing campaign you want. This came before, and the Israel's reacted in any way, you know, shape or form. So you have people that are, you know, on the political left, essentially cheering on the murder of 1,400, you know, Jews, and that's like, holy shit. I mean, this is like, we were clearly raised to identify this as being bad. You know, again, it's not to say you have to give the Israeli state carte blanche to do anything. Some of the things they're doing in the West Bank, you know, I don't agree with, but just murdering civilians is a horrible thing. So I think there is this, you know, holy crap, this does look a lot like, you know, 1933 Germany a little bit, you know, and I know people make that kind of comparison, like, you know, way too much. And, you know, I don't want to go down that, you know, that
rabbit hole. Yeah.
You know, but it certainly is stuff that, you know, it should have, we thought it was taboo to get up in Sydney in front of the Opera House and chant the Jews, you know, and this kind of stuff. Like, what the hell happened that people are just doing this on camera? But I think, you know, to your question, you're kind of like, you know, it's just going to like result in any kind of reformation. I don't know. And you know, I think that if you kind of like think of this as dominoes, I mean, if you think of like from 2020 to 2023, things have gotten a little bit better, right? You know, we see some people are sort of like backing away from, you know, peak wokeness, again, to use that word. I know you don't want to use it too much, but, you know, so things have gotten a little bit better over these last 3 years. But and some people have gotten optimistic. I've seen some essays written saying like, this is starting to get better. It's eventually going to go away. And if that is true, I'm not saying it's definitely true, but if that is true, and you think of like different groups or like dominoes, like maybe the politicians, like, you know, the Democrat Party will come to its senses and keep, you know, electing people like Joe Biden, who's reasonably moderate, you know, compared to your alternatives like, you know, AOC or whatever. But you know, the last domino to fall is almost certainly going to be academia, because this was the origin point for this whole thing. It was academics that created it. It wasn't social media. Wasn't politicians. It was academia that created this problem. So I think academia is going to be the last of these dominoes to fall, if in fact there's going to be a falling of dominoes. And I think that it's going to take some degree. It's going to take a national effort. I mean, I don't think that universities individually are going to reform in any meaningful way without some kind of national or at least state by state level push. And that's not to say that I'm advocating for, so we see some states that have done it, like Texas and Florida. I'm not advocating for everything that those states are doing, you know, as some of the things the states are doing are pretty authoritarian, you know, as well, you know, so stopping people from, you know, touching on a certain topic at universities or removing tenure, that kind of stuff. I don't think those are great ideas, but I do think there needs to be some kind of like national or again, at least state level. We got to bring like different stakeholders together, alumni, you know, businesses that hire college graduates, the colleges themselves, politicians from both the left and the right, kind of like, what do we really want universities to do? Because this probably isn't it, right? Whatever we're doing right now is probably not what we want universities to do. So how do we get them back to like 1989, you know, when American universities were like the pride of the world? They were producing, you know, reasonably good research. You know, they were left wing. There's no question about it, but they weren't like this. You know, and you could say, well, maybe the seeds of today were, you know, sort of in place in 1989. But at least things were much better. That, you know, how do you kind of reverse this process to, you know, to get universities to be a bit more socially representative of, you know, we're always going to be stuffy elites. You know, that's not going to go away. But at least, yeah, how do you get like more conservative faculty? How do you get, you know, institutions to be real supporters of free speech and intellectual curiosity? And I think it's going to take something other than relying on universities themselves to do it. I don't see a lot of appetite at the
inside the
university
institution.
level to do that.
Yeah. The sad thing is, the number one response that I've heard when especially right after when Yale and Harvard came out in such a visceral way, basically against what happened to these poor Israelis, and they were being pro-Hamas even despite everything that was going on. Really bad luck. The number one response when they say things like to the river, to the sea, well, oh, they're young people. They're just ignorant. Now, put aside that these are supposed to be the cream of the crop. These are supposed to be the smartest kids in this country at 300 plus million. Putting that aside, that doesn't make it better. That actually makes it worse. And it's like, okay, but these are the people who are going to populate. They're going to be your judge. They're going to be your lawyer. They're going to be your doctor. They're going to be at the county clerk's office. They're going to, these are the people who are going to have control over your lives. And the fact that they are ignorant of these very important, though divisive and hard topics, it scares me. It scares me because I worry, like, what kind of people are going to be here in the future when the adults of now who came from a time, when you were going to school, even to a degree when I was still in college in the early 2010s, where they remember, we're a meritocratic society, you get ahead by being more functional and more effective. And that's going away. I don't know how we go back to that when even those people are refusing to do their jobs. And this is, I apologize that so often I seem to go back to this on CultureScape here. But, this is a conversation we're having in the disability community because we have a lot of recognition, especially on social media, even the news sometimes, that there are issues that are not being handled very well. Trying to get disability it's like winning the lottery. It's just so ridiculously intense and complicated and makes zero sense that they're using standards that were created in the early 70s. I mean, like, when I went into disability, I was asked, do you want to be a pillow factory worker? Because, there's all those pillow factories. Do you want to be an elevator? I wouldn't be surprised if they told me, oh, by the way, what do you think about operating elevators? Like, I don't think anyone still does that.
Yeah.
I worry because it's like with the pain stuff, it's like we're getting all these great state laws passed. We had the Supreme Court in Rouen come out in support of medical freedom. And none of it means a single thing because the people who are in charge, the politicians, the people in these institutions, if they do not enforce it, and they see this and they know that these things exist. So there are things that if we grabbed them could fix the problem, but they're refusing to pick it up. How do you get past that? That's the thing, though. It's the moral apathy. It's like, it doesn't matter what we do if they just won't be responsible and do what they're supposed to do. And no one really wants to do that because anytime, even still, despite everything, you are that one guy in the room, like James Damore over at Google, that poor moron. You speak up when you said, oh, you actually want to find out the most effective way to do it. And he believed that. But that's going to be so detrimental. We are only starting to see the negative impacts of these things. I seriously worry about the institutions of the future. And you make that point about colleges. That is a great point, by the way. Pretty much everyone I know, and many even inside of academia, agree that the student loan system is just bonkers. It's totally ridiculous. It's a complete mess. It needs to change. And everyone agrees with this except the people who could actually do something about it. Yeah. And I think that's what's happened across the country, across our Western culture, whether it's entertainment with comics, whether it's books, whether it's science, whether it's medicine. I don't know. What do you even do with that? I'll end my comment here before you can speak again. But someone made the great point. The founding fathers believed in several principles that would keep the Constitution and the government order together. One of those principles was that people are selfish and they will jealously guard their powers, their aptitudes. So they want to. I'm working for the District of Kentucky. I'm in charge of I'm on the board for, I don't know, cattle. I'm gonna protect my little cattle Kentucky thing like crazy. I'm not gonna let anyone get near it. I'm gonna be such a pain in the butt. They're gonna have to kiss the ring. That's not even happening anymore. Even the politicians are like, I don't care.
Right.
I just want to go on the news. I want to get my pay. I want to go on Ben Shapiro this week. I don't care. It's like, what do you even do with that?
Yeah.
No adults in the room.
Yeah.
Okay, rant over. Sorry,
no,
Chris.
So I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's exactly it. It's people generally don't think, and that's why, even all these moral things, land acknowledgments, they're all goofy. They're all, it's all for the individuals trying to make themselves look good. It has nothing to do with helping Native Americans or this kind of stuff, right? Yeah. So you have to understand, people mostly, I mean, there are exceptions, but people mostly do what's good for them, right? So if you want to enact change, you have to either change the leadership, or you need to change the incentive structure for the people who are, in leadership. So that's why I say, it's going to take some sort of either state or national level effort if you want to change universities, hopefully to function better, then first off, you have to have some kind of like dialogue about like what do we want universities to do? And once you kind of figure out like they should like produce knowledge and be, like crucibles for, open exchange of intellectual thought, like whatever we decide that's what I would like them to do. But, whatever we decide we want them to do, well, then you're right. I mean, you say, if we want you guys to be like, free speech advocates and like produce like actual facts, not a bunch of bullshit, and they're going to nod and say, yeah, we'll do that. But they're not, right? Because it's not in their interest to do that. Why would you give people the power, to say whatever they want when you could stop them, right? And that's really more than normal human inclination. So you have to think of, well, what kind of levers do we have? And the reality is most universities take money from the federal government, I mean both public and private universities.
Yeah, no, boatloads, semi-trucks full every year.
And all universities get, alumni, donations that are a big deal. Again, both public and private. All universities get, whether it's grants or other, sort of entitlements or whatever else. So those are the levers. So you kind of say, well, you need to like, really adopt like institutional neutrality. The University of Chicago's policies on institutional neutrality and free speech, and you need to like take some of these departments and like they gotta, gender studies is a perfectly reasonable field, but they need to like produce actual scholarship that's factually true on some level. We always know there's always some back and forth, but has to have some level of basic reliability or validity. If not, either you gotta, if they can't do it, then you gotta get rid of these fields. Like they're like astrology, right? We don't have astrology departments, or intelligent design departments at universities. So if they can't manage it, then ditch them. And if they can, or if they can, reform, then keep them. And if you don't do these things, if you still are, sending out students who all they do is like have die-ins and, run around with slogans, gas the Jews or whatever the hell they're doing, or ripping down posters of kidnapped children. If that's what you're producing, then we're not going to give you, I mean, you can still exist, but we're not going to give you donations anymore, or you're not going to get research funding from the federal government. I mean, those are the kind of levers that I think that eventually we're going to have to consider. Now, of course, you have to think about, well, what about like government intrusion in these universities, and how do you do this with free speech? The answer is, of course, it's a tough conundrum. But I think what you could do, and make this not a threat to free speech, is you don't fire anybody, but you can freeze hiring. So if you have a department. I keep picking on gender studies. I don't mean to pick on gender studies. If you're doing like psychology, hey, this psychology department is producing garbage, right? You could freeze hiring in that department until they figure out how to hire people that do legitimate open science, pre-registered research or something like that, that is going to be less inclined to be hijacked by these moral agendas. So, I mean, that is something that we'll have to kind of think about. Like if we're going to start using state and national levers on universities, how do you do that while also balancing free speech issues? And I think that's a legitimate concern. But on the other hand, what's happening in universities right now is not free speech, at so many universities already. So we need to do something, and we did see like alumni pull their donations from Harvard and other universities this last month, University of Pennsylvania, so on and so forth, because of the inability of these universities to take any kind of a stance that meant anything, on the murders in Israel. And I think that's legitimate. I think that's, the universities aren't owed this money. And if their product is poor, I work at a university. I'm not my best interest to say this stuff. I want my university to still stand 18 years from now when I retire, right? After that, I don't care. But I love being an academic. I love working at a university. So I'm not the sort of person that, is naturally inclined to criticize universities at large. But I do recognize that they're in a crisis stage, right now, and something needs to be done, and I'm very pessimistic universities are going to be able to do it on their own, and they're not going to do it unless there's some kind of incentive. But we do need highly effective universities that are producing real knowledge and that are crucibles of free speech. What we have now are activist organizations that are stifling free speech. So how do we get from one to the other? We're not going to do it for reason, so we have to figure out some kind of incentive structure to get universities to, reform. And I think that does need to be done on the national level.
This month, by the way, do you like Ghostbusters? Are you a fan?
I had, but if you'd asked me in 1984, I would have said yes. I've since gone back and watched that movie and go, oh my God, it's so bad. And for me, it's one of those that did not age well. Bill Murray's character is such a jerk.
I love it. I know. I'm sorry. I love it. I even love the second one, and I know the second one's terrible.
Yeah, the second one, even at the time, was terrible. But yeah, no, I loved it at the time. I loved it. And, I was like, oh, I'd love to be a Ghostbuster. It looked like so much fun.
I only bring it up because parapsychology, you were seeing kind of the end of it in the 80s. I think there's like 1 or 2 universities in the country that still do have something like a parapsychology department, but there used to be parapsychology departments. And for those who don't know, parapsychology is just a fancy way of saying studying the paranormal. So it's like in Ghostbusters, where they're at a college at the beginning. So you're like studying telepathy, precognition, ghosts, psychokinesis, apparitions, the whole 9 yards. And if we're going to the standard of you don't actually have to produce results and you just have to talk about, the meta, it's like YouTube essays where you have a 5-hour essay, but isn't actually directly on the thing. It's about the meta-analysis of the thing. I know that's actually a term that actually applies to the scientific field and research. Yeah. But it's like, if we're going to that standard, I feel like parapsychology, they should have held out a little longer. If they only held out 20 more years, they'd be in the golden age. They'd be making money hand over fist. But it didn't hold out. It just didn't hold out.
We wouldn't need to, don't worry about quantitative evidence for ghosts. We'll talk about people's lived experience.
That's right.
With ghosts.
It's perfect. That's like the ultimate lived experience. Like, how are you going to disprove it?
Or unlived experience, as the case might be. But that's what we're doing, right? This is another way of knowing. Well, this kind of stuff, another way of whatever the hell it is. And I understand that, like, American Indians, and I use that term, by the way, purposely, because research studies show that that's still the most popular term among that group of people, other than they really just prefer to be called by their tribe, right? But so I use that term respectfully. And I know they've been through a lot. Many Native Americans have reservations to live in poverty. There are real concerns that we should be compassionate about, that we should try to help these folks out in any way that we can. So I'm I actually love Native American history, the history of the North American tribes. I'm really fascinated by this stuff. They're really remarkable cultures. The Iroquois, the Comanche, the Sioux were like almost like Sparta. They had these empires that, by the way, were colonial. They were colonizing empires, slave owning, genocidal empire, but they're cool history, and it's not because I approve of all these things, right? But they're interesting. But anyway, point being is like all that stuff's fascinating, and people should learn about these cultures, and people should respect people, who are Native American or American Indian. But then we're getting to this, like, there was something in Canada recently from some organization that was talking about like Turtle Island and like treating it as if it's like a serious thing, that the idea that we all, it's apparently, I think it's actually a new term, but it's sort of like an amalgam of like different Native American beliefs about like, it's creationism, right? Basically the idea that there's like, we all live under a lie, all that kind of stuff. I think you'll be respectful of those beliefs, just the way that you're respectful of like a Baptist who believes the earth is 8,000 years old, or someone else who's essentially a creation. We be respectful of those people's views. You have the right to believe that stuff, but we shouldn't teach it at university as if it's true. Indigenous knowledge about history or indigenous knowledge about medicine. I mean, people died young. Modern medicine is just better. I mean, it's got weaknesses. I'm not going to say it's perfect by any means, but this idea that to be respectful of these cultures, that we have to treat their knowledge as if it's the same thing as science is really kind of silly. It's like, I don't expect people to treat like ancient Celtic knowledge, which is my background, as if it, was true. It wasn't. And so again, I'm not disrespecting these people, but universities have lost their minds. They're trying to be nice, I guess, but they're being patronizing,
it's not of any value to them. That's the craziest thing. You see this all the time. The people who are most into the DEI stuff, what do they tend to be? Do they tend to be indigenous sometimes, or Hispanic or Native American sometimes, but usually they tend to be white. Usually they're women. And if you look at the class background, it's like most of them, their families are making, double the average salary. And I'm not, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. But it comes with certain class expectations, and that's kind of what it seems like the institutions are wanting to reinforce. But that's of no value, like the Native Americans. This has frustrated me to pieces because part of my mission, I served a lot of it with people who were Lakota Sioux, and the terrible poverty that I got to witness really still bothers me to this day. There are real problems, and they just aren't being dealt with. But it seems like to me, it's like all ideas are valid except the true ones and the really hard ones. But that doesn't benefit anyone. It only benefits the people who are already comfortable. It's like what they say about journalism. To afflict the comfortable. It's not afflicting the comfortable. It's exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
But for some reason, if you say this stuff, you're immediately put on one side of the aisle. You obviously vote a certain way. You're obviously a certain kind of person. I wish, I keep hoping things will change, but this kind of stuff just keeps getting reinforced. And the sad thing is that there are things these institutions are supposed to cover. You brought up the Native American issue. In the U.S., there are parts of the country for Native Americans where, they're living at third world standards. Life expectancy is much lower. They have a much lower income. They have a much lower positive future, and it's frustrating. And I know I'm kind of harping on too much on this because I think we've basically covered it, but people just don't want to be adults anymore, and that does come with a cost. And the thing is, as anyone that's ever had kids or dealt with kids, they pick up what the adults around them are doing. And this kind of stuff, so many people have problems with Gen Z, but how much of that is because they were just paying attention or doing what their parents, the generations before, were doing. I would end this part though, and I would move to a positive. That we can have this conversation, that there are more people who are aware. While people may not be doing anything, the people who are in charge of Harvard or Yale aren't doing anything. There is interest. And I think that there's interest. I think that there are people like yourself, like Wilfred Riley, people who are in academia, and there seems to be more of you guys all the time. I mean, it's still slow, it's drips and drabs, but it is growing. That kind of stuff does give me hope, but I don't know if that means we lead to a future where there's a better tolerance for free speech and there's more people who are demanding results and honest analysis, or if it's just going to be this truncated thing where you have the majority institutions are controlled by, the people who are in charge right now, and then there's like this minority of institutions, and maybe that would be the best outcome, but I'm not certain. Yeah. I appreciate you coming on, Chris. I know this isn't like a super happy thing, and you have put a lot. I've always respected you and your work as a speaker, as a writer, as a scientist. You've always been honest up front, and you generally haven't been trying to just tell people what they want to hear. I think that is so very important. And just speaking from my own perspective, working in news, it is rare. I don't know why we seem to live in this moment. This is how it is, but that seems to be what's going on. And maybe there's a connection there. Maybe it's because we live in the most comfortable moment, medicine, economy, convenience of technology, and maybe that has something to do with it. I'm not sure. But it does leave me depressed. It leaves a lot of people depressed. And I'm just going to probably end this program with everyone sad and mopey because we're all doomed. It's all over. Might as well roll over, give it to the Chinese. So then we can watch.
I'm a little bit more optimistic. I mean, nothing's forever, right? And everything kind of goes in cycles. And I'll say this, I'm going to talk to my own lived experience now. I made fun of the lived experience, but everybody's always worried about Gen Z, right? And you see all these surveys that come out that Gen Z have these very authoritarian, attitudes. And again, Gen Z was kind of made to look bad over the last month with the anti-Semitism and all that. But my experience with students, working in the university is largely positive. And I think the problem that the students have is not that they're hyper authoritarian or hyper woke, to use that word again necessarily, but they're just repeating what they've heard. And mostly it's kind of like education. So if you tell them, they show up and they think like, that Native Americans lived in like these communes where they held hands and worshipped, trans individuals,
Dude, this is something that I was starting to see even when I was on my mission, exactly a decade ago, by the way. That'll be 10 years from that. Where you'll hear this all the time if you're on Twitter. The two-spirit idea. Oh, Native Americans, they've always, Native Americans, obviously, they're just all one big thing. They're just all one giant thing. They all had this two-spirit thing going way, way back. And it's like, have you actually spent any time with people who identify as Native American? It's like, no, that is not a thing. If you were to go to the Sioux Res, the Dakota Res out here, so you're going to Rosebud or Pine Ridge, and you were saying, oh, and I'm two-spirit. I mean, that's a good way to get yourself killed on those reservations. I mean, that's not a fun, happy idea that's celebrated. That's like, what is kind of wrong with you, weirdo? And it's like, that isn't reflective of the Native American experience at all. But that's so many people, it's like the top guy on Twitter for Lakota Sioux is this guy called Lakota Man. And he's a white guy. He's never been on reservation. It's been broken several times, but people just keep going back to that. I know that was a tangent, but it's just one of those things. It just rubs me the wrong way.
Well, I tell my students, just for fun, next time you have a chance to go to a Native American reservation or whatever, you talk to your tour guide, whoever's chaperoning you around or whatever, ask them, hey, can I talk to, who's your leading two-spirit person? Just like, see the blank stare.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. It's like, it's so bizarre because the people who say they represent these groups probably have had the least amount of time with them. Because it's like the issue of, my brother, oddly enough, he also served on reservation, but he served down in Arizona. And one common thing you see on the reservation, it's funny because you see these very environmental groups always strongly associating themselves with the tribes. And it's like animal rights, taking care of animals, not a high priority on the res, unfortunately. I think the saddest thing I saw one time was you're driving through after picking up my brother. So we stopped, we were in reservation territory in Arizona. So we stopped the gas station. And as we were waiting, I was waiting in the car. I watched this old guy come in. He has a res dog with him, which is basically, it's just a mutt. That's how it goes. He gets to the car, the dog's hanging around. It's his dog. The dog is happy. He goes and does his stuff. The dog is kind of walks around smelling. He gets to the truck. He knows the dog is there. He just drives off. And then I watched this dog for half an hour walk around the gas station, trying to talk to people, figure out what the heck just happened. And this is, to me, it was a huge animal lover. I have a dog sitting on my lap right here.
Yeah.
It was like demonstrous. I was like, that terrible, terrible guy. But John's like, Peter, you know how it is. That isn't the abnormal. That's the standard over here.
Yeah.
It's just, we're so disconnected from reality. It's funny, but it's also pretty sad.
I mean, the good news, this is my optimism side of this, is if you tell students this, 95% of them are fine with it. They're not attached to these ideas. I mean, you can tell students, yeah, slavery in the U.S. was bad, but did you know that North Africans, took nearly 2 million slaves out of Europe at about the same time? It doesn't excuse what we did to Africa, and of course, the African slaves were first kidnapped by Africans too, so there was, whites were enslaved, in North Africa, and most of them died. There's no white, diaspora in Africa. That they just vanished from history, and most of them. History is complicated, right? And people are just kind of crappy everywhere. But and students, if you tell them this, they're okay with it. They absorb it, and and they're like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the students aren't as radical. The median student, at least, is not as radical as I think people are worried. But they just don't get told these things. Nobody tells them that Native Americans engaged in genocidal wars against other Native Americans before Europeans ever showed up, or that, the Ottoman Empire, had a massive slave, market that was running people from all over the world through it, or that the worst genocides in history took place in China, and it was just China versus other Chinese, for the most part, or that, it was a Central Asian who has the world record for killing off the most people per capita, Tamerlane, right? In the world at the time. But you tell people this, and then they go, okay, yeah, I get it. Like human behavior is kind of complicated, and there's a lot of bad stuff. And then they're able to, they don't get mad. They don't like try to cancel you. Maybe 1 out of 50 do, but most of the students are, or even, and it's a matter if they themselves are Native American or Black or Asian or trans. And you can kind of talk about the complexities of trans issues, and most trans students are fine with it. It's just we're all sort of, I don't know, hostages of that 5% who have really radical ideas. But my hope for the future is that most Gen Zers, when you give them good information, will adjust to it, and they're not upset by it. And the problem I think we have right now is we're just not giving them that kind of well-rounded education. We're not teaching them civics. We're not teaching them history very effectively. So I think the fix is easy. We just need to, but in the sense of easy, in the sense of we just need to change the educational system. Now that's not easy, but I think that's the problem with a lot of what's happening today is just K through 12, and then universities all have these really big problems with how we're teaching our kids today, and we just need to figure out how to fix that.
You make 2 good points there that I do agree with. The first is that it doesn't take a lot of responsibility for a lot of positive change. You just need that one good teacher. You just need people to just try a little more, and that can make a huge difference. That is the advantage when you're at rock bottom. Even a small increase, if you're at 1 and you go to 2, you just doubled.
Yeah.
So that is one of the positives. The other thing is, like, and you bring up a good point, most of the people are in for this. It's a lot of Gen Z has surprisingly kind of like Gen X in the sense that they're kind of very sarcastic about how things are. But the problem is you always, you have that 1 in 50, but that 1 in 50 can get someone fired. That 1 in 50 can, get another kid kicked out of school. I don't know if I shared this story on the podcast before, but I had a friend, someone I talked to, they were taking medical school, and they're a member of my church. So Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Mormon, what have you. And they were at medical school, and they're a pretty good student, but they're a bit too inquisitive, and they were a bit too, they were kind of like James Damore in the sense that when they say, we want to hear your opinion, they actually believed it. Anyhow, so the student is in medical school, and apparently during one of the classes, a student and then one of the visiting teachers, so it wasn't a regular, had got very upset that they felt that he was being rude and dismissive. And not that he had said or done anything necessarily bad from what I can tell. Maybe it was just like body language, or they for whatever they did really like him. Humans are like this. They don't necessarily always even need a reason to pick out someone from the herd. And so he gets called, and it becomes this big thing. So he's brought to the dean of the medical school, talks to the dean of medical school. First time this happens, I got your back. You're right. This is all so silly. It's all being ridiculous. You just need to focus on trying to get through and keep doing your best. You could do it, buddy. And then he goes away. Unfortunately, as these things happen, they don't tend to be let go of. Whoever felt they were the agreed party to start this thing off, they don't tend to let go. So this happens again. He gets brought in a second time. And this time, the dean, who is also, by the way, a member of my church, which I know that shouldn't be favoritism, but sometimes it helps. In this situation, the second time, where it's clear that this might actually hurt the medical school dean, totally different outcome. It was, you just need to be quiet, and you need to stop causing trouble. And it's the same guy, and it's not like anything's changed. But what has changed is that maybe his job is on the line, or something that might impact him. And then he washes his hand to this kid, and the kid, the person I'm talking to, this is deeply unfair. Like, he's been treated this way. I agree. But this is just how humans are, and you only need that one person. You only need that one Karen, and it causes so much trouble. I don't know what the Karen version of is. No, that's not Chad. Whatever that is.
That's incel thing.
Yeah, Kevin. I don't know. But until that changes, though, I think we may be in a pain spot for a while to come. But we'll have to see. You've brought in some really good points today, Chris. I think you moved me a little farther away from the edge, jumping off the ledge here. I mean, and there are lots of good things, right? I mean, the world of books is fantastic. The world of alternative journalism is fantastic. YouTube shows like this. So, I mean, it's not all bad, but it's definitely tough. Is there anything else? We'll stop here. tell me, well, Chris, what is the positives? What can you tell us that will give us hope, that will put wind beneath our wings like the soaring eagle, so that we don't leave this episode so despondent?
Well, first off, things are better in 2023 than they were in 2020. Very clearly, I think. They're still worse than they were in 2013, but they're better than they were in 2020. So I think we're moving in a positive direction. More people are speaking out, and people are voting with their dollars with some of the stuff. And that's what's going to matter to a large degree. So audiences are finding their voice as well in terms of what movies or books they want to support, which ones they don't. J.K. Rowling is still a multi-billionaire, so that means something. And Halloween, we get like 500 kids. I'm not kidding, 500 kids at our house. There are plenty of Harry Potter costumes still. So, with all that stuff going on with her, she's doing fine, So I think in general, people are getting tired of that sort of moral policing all the time. And I can tell you, this is probably the positive thing, the Gen Zers are sick of it too. Yes, they are more liberal than past generations. They believe in things like universal health care or whatever else, but they're tired of being, they're the ones that are being policed more than everybody else by their peers, and they hate it, and so they're getting super tired of it as well. So I don't think that we have a huge cohort of authoritarians who are rising up, in the new generation. We right now have a small number of authoritarians who are very loud and very powerful, as you mentioned. And what we need to do is figure out how to give that group of people less power than what they've got right now. But I am optimistic that the next generation, the Gen Zers, are not actually going to break the world.
Okay, world will survive. Thank you so much, Chris, for coming on. Chris Ferguson is a fantastic writer, scientist, researcher. He's a regular contributor for Psychology Today. You can find him also on his Substack, which is, what is your Substack? It's like Manor Grimoire, or do I have that backwards?
If you just look at Secrets of Grimoire Manor on Substack, I think it's like, substack.grimoire.com or something like that, but it's Secrets of Grimoire Manor on Substack, and you'll be able to find it.
Okay, and he's also on Twitter. Chris is awesome. Anything I've read him do or watched him on, he's usually great. I usually learn something, so I appreciate him taking the time to come on. I know this conversation was a little wobbly, but he's getting over bronchitis. I am just kind of feeling, I don't know, a little dampened in the mood today, a little despondent. So I appreciate Chris talking me away from the ledge. I think we're going to end it here, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch CultureScape. Thank you again to Bain Books Publishing and Young Voices for helping put this together and supporting the program. Thank you, of course, to my editor, Chris Hollywicky. I have no idea how he's going to edit all this. Chris is a gem and a master of the video editing arts, and we thank him once again. And to all of you, listeners, audience, viewers, thank you. I hope you learned something here today. I know I sure did. And I guess we're going to cut it here. Until next time, my friends, keep geeking out.